Shabbat Shalom. In the most recent previous portions that we've had, we've been reading really intricate instructions on how to assemble the Mishkan, or the traveling tabernacle. I think Rabbi Olivier has referred to them as the IKEA instruction sheets at times. This week we have a double portion that gets into something a little bit more relevant for us, which is how to build a community. In this portion, it's actually a double portion, we find the laws for the sabbatical year, which comes every 7 years, just like the Shabbat comes every 7 days, and the Jubilee year, which comes every 50 years, and also a lot of laws that can also be found elsewhere about protecting the Israelite people from permanent poverty and from servitude. And then we have the list of good things that are going to happen if you follow these laws and bad things that are going to happen if you don't. So we look at the Torah as a blueprint for community. And a lot of the commandments and rules in the Torah can actually be found in a lot of the civil and criminal justice codes in governments around the world. But only a few. I mean, we certainly couldn't embrace all of them. We can't have, laws about not wearing linen and cotton in the same shirt, that kind of stuff. So there's always going to be a debate about, there's the ones that everybody knows wouldn't be appropriate, and then there's the ones that everybody knows would be, like, it's no-brainer, don't murder, don't steal. But then there's this big middle ground where it's a debate, and sometimes the debate rages about whether the laws that we learn in Torah are appropriate or necessary for the laws that we have in our society. As Behar opens the first parsha, we're instructed to work the land for 6 years and then let it sit for the 7th year. You shouldn't plant your seeds, you shouldn't cultivate, you shouldn't harvest anything from the land for the full year. The only thing you're allowed to eat is stores that you have saved up and anything that grows on uncultivated land. Now, in agricultural science now, we find that it makes a lot of sense to let the field sit for a year. It rejuvenates the soil, and it's good agricultural practice. And I've heard people say that, God knew what God was doing, telling the Israelites to do that. But there's one problem, and that is that God protected the Israelites from hardship during the sabbatical year by giving them a massive harvest in the 6th year, which would, agriculturally speaking, be the most depleted crop. But God promised that in the 6th year, they would get a crop that would last 3 years. For the 6th year, for the 7th year, and then also for the 8th year while they're waiting for that crop to come back in. So it isn't based on agricultural knowledge or best practices. It's based on the idea that there is abundance and that we can rely on God to provide that abundance for us. Now, do we follow this in modern world? Well, outside of Israel, we don't. It was never intended in Torah to take place anywhere except in Israel. And in Israel, there are quite a few Orthodox Jews who do, in some fashion, fulfill this mitzvah. The thing is, they don't really have that level of faith, and maybe it's based on experience. They needed to find a workaround because they weren't getting in the 6th year what they needed. And farms don't exist today just to feed the family that owns the farm. They exist as business, and they employ a lot of people. And so shutting everything down for a full year is a problem. So they found a workaround, and that is that they interpret the commandment as you can't eat food from a field or a farm that belongs to an Israelite, to a Jew. But if the field belongs to a non-Jew, then it's okay. So what they do is every year at Rosh Hashanah, every sabbatical year at Rosh Hashanah, beginning. They sell all their land to the government, and the government sells all their land to a non-Jew, one man. This is a sabbatical year, and this year that man's name is George Strakeman. So George is now the biggest landowner in the entire country of Israel, but only until next fall, because at Rosh Hashanah he will then turn back, sell back the land and any profits back to the Israelites. It's not designed for him to be able to make money. It's designed to allow the Israelites who are following it to not lose too much and still be able to fulfill the commandment. So this reminds me of a sketch I saw in Jon Stewart. Such a wise rabbi. So for some reason or other, he was explaining the concept of eruv. And an eruv is a workaround that we find in the Talmud to solve a problem caused by the commandment, the Talmudic rule, that you can't carry anything outside your house on Shabbat, which makes getting to the synagogue kind of difficult. You can't take your prayer shawl, you can't carry your prayer book, you can't even carry your child. So in order to work around this, they came up with the idea of an eruv, which is an actual piece of wire that is strung around the neighborhood, and within the confines of that wire, it is as if it were in your home. So you can get from your front door to the synagogue without breaking the commandment. So when he was explaining this, he turns to camera 3 and he says, eruv, ancient Hebrew word meaning loophole. So back to the sabbatical year. So this loophole that they have found is meeting the letter of the law, that is it really meeting the intent of the law? Is it based on the idea of faith? I guess it's based on faith in George, because he could actually kind of take off with all their land, I guess, so there's some faith there. But is it based on a belief in the abundance of the universe and the justice, the inherent justice in the idea that everything actually belongs to the universe, not to us. And our job is to make sure it's evenly distributed. Which brings us to the Jubilee year. Now the Jubilee year happens every 50 years. And so along with the exact same land use rules, we also have rules that are designed strictly to create an even distribution of wealth. All debts are forgiven, all property is returned back to its original owner, and all slaves are freed. Total income redistribution. According to God's instruction sheet for assembling community, the obligation to care for everyone in the community and to make sure that everyone has enough from the abundance of the universe that they need is front and center of the rules that we find in Torah. 4 times in just this one little parsha, the Torah says, if your brother or sister should be reduced to poverty, and then goes on and says what needs to be done. And even goes on to say what should have been done in the first place to keep that from happening, because that is the higher goal, to make sure people don't fall into poverty. Torah teaches us that making sure that people don't fall into poverty is so important that there are rules against charging interest on loans. Not just in the sabbatical year, or not just in the Jubilee year or the sabbatical year, but all the time. So this parsha has generated volumes of commentary, of course, over centuries, millennium, about how we meet these obligations in a society today. One of the things that has often brought up is that it's not just required to share or to provide the safety net, but that it must be done with extreme care about the dignity of the person who is receiving. And that is historical. In Leviticus Rabbah, which is a commentary that was written back in the 5th century, we find the following caution against shaming the poor. And these are direct quotes. Well, it was in Hebrew. It's been translated. But why don't you go out and find a job, make some money, put your own bread on the table? Or, look at those thighs, look at those hips, look at that fat body. Such a person can work. Let him do so and take care of himself. Sound familiar? It's the 5th century. They had the same problems. They were being warned about that same reaction. The warning is that such people who treat those in need this way are bringing evil to their community because they aren't recognizing that all of us are created in the image of God, and therefore for no other reason require and deserve the dignity and honor that we should be giving them. A modern-day Torah commentator, Nekama Leibowitz, also says that the laws of the Jubilee are designed to maintain an even distribution of wealth. Again, her words. She writes, her interpretation is to prevent the evolution of a landless class and the concentration of power and property in the hands of the few. She died in 1997 at the age of 92, so she wrote these words long before we had the wealth inequality that we have today. So, many of our modern-day politicians are quick to claim that our laws are and should be based on biblical law, especially when they want to use certain of those laws to condemn certain people or to protect certain privileges that they have. But they aren't much concerned about those laws, when they want to pass a law requiring drug tests for welfare recipients, or allowing corporations and the super rich to vote with their dollars. Those laws don't seem to come to mind. Now in the portion, we come back to the portion, we come to the list of good things that happen when we do and bad things that happen when we don't. First, the good things. If we're following all these laws, we get rain in the appropriate seasons, we get bountiful harvests, and we get security and peace in the land. But if we don't, we get, and it's a little bit of a longer list, of course, we get misery, we get consumption, we get fever, we get enemies who will conquer, cities in ruins, wild beasts that will eat your cattle and your children, and your sacrifices will be rejected. Pretty horrible. Now, most rational thinkers today do not actually follow this kind of if-then, if you do this, then that will happen, type of theology. But we do still have leaders in our society who say earthquakes and hurricanes happen because we broke this one little law over here that they think is so absolutely important. But we didn't follow that particular law, so earthquakes and hurricanes come. I reject the if-then theology, whether it's presented by the televangelists or by Torah. I don't think that that is what Torah is here to teach us today. I think these horrible things are a list of metaphorical consequences rather than punishments. Two of the verses that jump out to me, the first one is, though you shall eat, you shall not be satisfied, which I think is a great description of society today. We are always buying bigger and better. We upgrade and replace technology that works just fine, but the new one has such cool features. Our dietary habits have created one of the most unhealthy populations in the Western world, and yet we're still unhappy, unfulfilled, and we're still searching. So we want more money in order to buy more stuff to fill this need we have. And it just won't work. I read a study a few years ago where the question was, when do you think you have enough money? and they were focusing strictly on millionaires. So they went to the people, they found that of the respondents, the people who had $1 million said when they had 2 million, they would feel secure. The people with 2 needed 5. The people with 5 needed 10. How is anybody ever going to feel like they have enough when they think that is what they need to feel enough? And then we come to a verse 17 that I think is one of the most chilling verses in the entire Torah. You shall flee though none pursues. And we see it again in another parsha that says, you shall flee as if chased by a driven leaf. What's so scary about that? Why would we be upset about being chased by a leaf or by nothing? Wouldn't it be scarier to be told you're going to be chased by an army or a murderer or the boogeyman? But if you think about it, if there's nothing chasing you and you still feel the need to run, how do you outrun nothing? It's always going to be there. And today, we teach our children to be afraid of strangers, even though statistically they're much higher, much more likely to be hurt by people already known to their family. We are told that immigrants are taking all our jobs, even though unemployment is way down. We obsess about crime and danger, even though violent crime rates are down lower than they've been in decades. But we're afraid. We're afraid of things that aren't there. So how are we ever going to feel safe? There's no coincidences about where things are placed in Torah. The message here is clear, to me at least. If you don't take care of the neediest in your community, if instead of focusing on that, you're focused on personal gain instead of communal responsibility, there's going to be big problems created. And they aren't going to be solved unless we go back and fulfill the commandments, the wisdom, the common sense that taking care of everybody takes care of all of us. Making the least of us the highest priority of our society and understanding that our mandate is to embrace the other and not fear the other creates a society that's safe for all. Most of the rules in Torah that spell out how you're supposed to treat people are followed by the line, because you were strangers in Egypt. This line is repeated 36 times in the Torah, more than any other line. And then think about it, 36, 2 times 18. 18 means life. 36 means life times 2. So it occurred to me, it's like, wow, so if you're taking care of these people, you're giving them life, and that is actually taking care of us. That gives us life. That gives everybody life. So to me, the lesson is to trust that the abundance of the universe belongs to the universe, and that we don't act out of fear of scarcity or believe that some undeserving other is going to take what is ours and would leave us diminished. I think that the lesson is actually that the belief in fear and scarcity is what diminishes us and has us constantly looking over our shoulders for the driven leaf.